This plugin cost me almost $250 and I wouldn't have paid any less. Let me show you why. But Christopher, you ask, why spend $239 for lens blur? A lot of the time, built-in lens blurs have bad depth sorting or really ugly blurry edges, and bloom is just not a replacement for accurate color management. You're also really limited in the look of your bokeh, and it always looks obviously fake and way too clean. You usually can't do very much in terms of colors for your bokeh, and even DaVinci Resolve Studio's really good bokeh effect that comes built in doesn't even have depth features, which means you can't do proper depth blur. So let's talk about Frischleft Lens Care a little bit. Frischleft Lens Care actually comes with two separate effects, depth of field and out of focus. They're both really handy, but first we're going to check out depth of field. So in this window, we can see what our final result is looking like. And here I've imported a Z depth pass that we can use to inform our bokeh. So if we just take this out from the color corrector, and we're just going to plug this straight into the depth of field, and then if we take our radius up, you'll see that now parts of the image are blurry and parts of the image are not. Right now it's actually inverted from the way that it should be. Frischleft likes it when the really far away parts are black and the near parts are white. So we can just click on this depth invert button, and that's going to invert the depth. There's this little gizmo that shows up. It's actually showing up in both of our windows. That's going to allow us to pick exactly where we want our depth to be. And if we just let go right there, it's automatically going to pick that point in 3D space. It's going to set our focal point to there. Now, the first thing that we'll notice is that we're getting much better edge detection than we get with the normal built-in tools. We're getting a couple of little glitches right here. So what we'll do, since we're working in a physically accurate space here in between our linear render and our Rec 709 output, I'm going to uncheck gamma correction. And now I've got a really nice, realistic looking depth blur. Now, if you want to change the look of the iris here, we can maybe bring down the roundness. We can bring up the number of facets. We can adjust the angle a little bit. If we bring up the border brightness, and we can even adjust the aspect ratio. But none of these are the single reason why I bought this plugin. The reason why I really bought this plugin is because we can import custom textures. So I'm just going to drag in this picture of a bokeh that I pulled using Photoshop from another image, and I'm going to run this through a letterbox node, and we can change the mode to pan and scan. So that way it's inside the 16:9 frame, so the plugin doesn't stretch it out weirdly. Plug it into the iris input of depth of field. Now we can take our radius and we can bring it up higher, and that'll slow the processing a little bit. You can see that we're actually getting the custom profile of the bokeh, which adds a ton of realism. We can even add in a color corrector and bring the gamma way down to add in tons more contrast. So now when it loads, you can see that we have a much more defined bokeh texture. So it's not just circles, it's these particular swirls with this interesting little pattern that we've pulled from the real bokeh of a real camera. We can even pull in custom textures like a heart, which means we have a ton of control over exactly what our bokeh can look like. And on top of that, it's an actual Z depth blur. So we're getting a really nice looking depth blur with custom textures, which honestly is not just a really useful feature, but it's a very important feature for visual effects. Imagine you're trying to composite something like fire into the background of a shot with a lot of depth of field. How do you exactly match the depth of field from that camera? Your bokeh would perfectly match, and your element would be perfectly composited into your scene. But on top of that, imagine you're doing an entirely CG scene like this, and you want to take a real bokeh element for your bokeh blur in the background to add in, again, tons more realism and accuracy. It's like an instant photoreal shortcut. If you're just going to blur a background, for example, we can use Frischleft out of focus. And the cool thing about the out of focus effect is it's way faster because it's uniformly blurring the entire image. You can even bring the radius up to something extreme like 500, and it'll render very fast. And it's not having to down res anything. Now, the other thing that the out of focus effect can do that the depth of field effect can't do is it can actually handle colored irises. So if we preview our bokeh texture here, we can see that there's a little bit of color around the edges. So in the out of focus plugin, if we just check this colored iris checkbox, we can maybe add a chromatic aberration effect. All of these little bokeh circles now have this red fringing around it. So being able to quickly put this together is really nice. Now, there is this one incredible hack that I've never heard anybody talk about before. So you know how you can take a bokeh circle from an image of stuff that's out of focus? Well, you can also take the hotspot from an image of a lens flare. So if we take that hotspot and plug it into our bokeh plugin, we can see that everything looks like it has this star glare on it. And maybe we want these bright parts to sparkle even more. So we'll just set our highlight selection, and we'll take our additive highlight and bring it up to something like 15. and turn off colored iris so that we get a bit of a cleaner look. And now if we hop over into our settings and bring down the blend, we've actually pulled the glow from a real camera and we're plugging it in and using it in our glow plugin. And we can bring our gamma down to like 0.5. That way the roll off of this glow is a little bit more accurate. And again, we can bring the radius way up, even as high as 300 if you want some nice and big streaks. Or, you know, I mean, you can go higher than that if you want to. It's really not something that's limiting you from making good comps, but it is something that is going to give you the ability to make even better shots. If you want to see another really cool, useful trick that professionals use for the renders all the time, you can check out this video to see how pros light their scenes using one trick that is instantly going to boost your photorealism.